All right, welcome everybody. Still have some people coming in. Wait a moment. Welcome to our second webinar for today. We're doing the same topic as we did earlier today about tracking and some other fun things with tracking and what you can do in Vista. If you have any questions, type in the chat box. We'll answer them as we go if they fit in places or at the end. So just feel free to put something there as we go. So, all right. So to get started, we're gonna go a little bit into the background of tracking and what is tracking. So I'll start with a little graphic here that kind of explains tracking in visual aspects. So tracking was originally done in the early days of lighting consoles when they didn't have the memory to store all the queue information in every queue. So what non-tracking would do is you'd have your information for your different queues, and it'll be stored as all the information all the time. So in here we have fixture 1 100% in all 4 queues, fixture 2 and fixture 3. So we have a total of 10 events in this queue or in this show file. With tracking, in order to eliminate the extra space, nothing changes. If it doesn't change, we don't store that information. So this 100% continues to keep going until it's told to change and do something else. Fixture 2 goes to 50%, then it's told to change to 100%, and it continues that way. And 3 goes to 25% in Q3. So we only have 4 events in this. Like I said, this was done to store or to save memory space. It's not so much of a concern anymore in today's consoles. However, tracking has kind of been the way that everyone's gotten to learn how lighting consoles work, and it can actually work quite nicely now with newer consoles and moving lights, because we don't necessarily need to program things like pan and tilt. We want them to stay where the lights are every time we go to the next queue. We don't have to reprogram every single of those values each time. So tracking really comes to benefit us. In Vista, Vista is a tracking console. So when I do things in here, they continue to stay going until I'm told them to change, till I tell them to change. We have lots of tools to change that, to untrack things as needed, and that's what we're going to talk about. So first off, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start by creating a new queue list. And in this queue list, we're going to start, I'm going to grab some fixtures, turn them on, and I'm going to put them in a position, put them in my singer position. I'm just going to add a couple different queues here, changing colors. And this is all these queues, or these are things we've done in previous webinars. So if you need to know more about queues, you'll have to go back and watch the other webinars. They are going to be on the YouTube channel. All right, so, and here we're going to go up and out. So, all right, so there's a few queues, and if I go in my timeline view, I can see what I've done in these queues. And you can see that right now, go back to my first queue, here are all my intensity events, here's my position events and my color events. When I go through these queues, you see the lights are still staying on, they're not moving, but the colors are changing. So these events are being tracked through to the next queue. And we go on and on through all that. So let's say there's something I want to change in here. So if I were to start with right now and grab my fixtures again, and I change them to, let's say, the band position, we can see that now they've gone from being in the singer to being in the band. However, when I keep going from here, they'll stay in the band as I go. So some of the tools we have to change that are things like Cueonly editing, blocking, and untrack events. So I'm going to start with the first one of untrack events, because I already have them in here. So if I program something like that, and I already did it, but I decided I didn't want to do that, there's a tool in the command, in the timeline menu, it says untrack events. And when I select the events that I want to untrack first, and when I do that, it creates a new event after in the following queue that takes them back to where they were before they did that. So that's kind of a handy little tool to get back to where you were if you had already done the change. All right, now I'm going to undo those changes. So I'm back to where I was before. So if I know that I want to make sure that the changes aren't done in other queues, I can turn on another tool called Cueonly editing. It's the first one in the tools menu. I've also added it to a soft key up here. When that is turned on, any change I make in this queue will be automatically untracked in the following queue. So for example, I have those fixtures, I put them in the band preset. You can see it automatically added that information to that following queue. Also, if I were to maybe take the intensity down, it would only affect this queue. So this is queue only editing. It allows me to do anything I want to and only affect these queues. I'm going to undo this too. Yeah, forgive me if I go too fast too on some of the stuff. We don't have a whole lot. We're not going to cover a whole lot, so I might have a lot of time at the end. So yeah, we're gonna keep going. And just to address Steve, your question real quick, I just happened to notice it. Queue-only editing is great usually in theater programs. There are people that like to do their queues in queue-only editing because that way they know that any change they've made isn't being made in any other queues following it. It kind of comes down to personal preference. If you understand tracking and what it does, then you might not need to worry about turning that on. Yeah, personally, I rarely use queue-only editing. I usually will use like untrack events or things like that. So another thing with tracking is there's another thing we can do with the queue list editing, and that's creating block queues. So what a block queue will do, a block queue will take the hard values, create hard values of what's in that queue list. So for right now, what I've done is now I've created these values. So anything that's tracking from here to here is going to stay. If I make any changes in this queue ahead of time, it's going to stop at this point and we're going to start fresh on the next one. Block queues are handy for things like blackouts, because if I were in another queue and I changed the value of a light or added a light to the previous queue and I forgot about it in the blackout, if it was not a block queue, the light would still be hanging, especially in theater, and you'd be stuck with this awkward look. So for example, in this queue ahead of here, if I were to take those fixtures and put them in my up preset, you can see that the up preset is here, but they go back to the singer preset because I made that a block. So now I know that this is what it's going to always end at. What block will also let me do is add fixtures in here. So right now I've only been messing with the Vipers. If I come back into my fixture chooser and I grab my profile fixtures and turn them on, I'm going to see that it adds an automatic release event in my block queue. So this is where it happens with having a blackout queue or something that's a block queue. If I added these lights and didn't have this block queue, when I played into that queue, the lights would be tracking through and they'd be hanging and I'd be stuck, looking funky. So block queues are very handy with that. I'm going to undo that again. So something else we have in Vista is called Superblock. So Superblock does a little bit more than blocking. It's blocking on steroids, but it also will affect other queue lists that are running at the same time. So for this example, I'm going to create a new queue list. And in this queue list, I'm just going to do a single queue with these profiles on. And then I'm going to take these lists and I'm going to put them on some playback so we can see what they're doing here. Get list 1 and list 2. Undock that for a bit. And we're going to slide that over there. All right, so let's say there's a point in the program where I want to do a special and I want only a certain amount of fixtures to be on. So what I would do, I'm going to make this in the Superblock queue right now. I'm going to turn those off. Turn these off. So now that's a look I want. I want to see that look all the time, even though this other queue list is playing. So now as I'm playing through my show, actually let's start this off from scratch, go back, turn those down. So I've got my look here, and I've got my look here at the profiles. So this cue list, let's say during the run of the show, I'm going to leave this cue list up all the time because these are my key lights on my performers. And I'm playing through my cues and all my stuff's happening. And it looks good. And I come to this moment where I want just that single backlight. When I create a Superblock cue, you can see that it makes the block notation up here in red. When I play that Superblock cue, it stomps out the other cue list. So what it's doing is it's still active here, but now I've just turned those fixtures off. And when I play to the next cue, my look will stay because it's still being tracked through. However, those fixtures are still off. So in a future webinar, we're going to do and get into other things like commands if I wanted to bring this back up, or I could hit the play on that one to bring it back up. But it's important to realize that Superblock does affect other cue lists. So it's not just something that's, just better than regular block. Oh, let's use Superblock, it must be better. It can have other effects on your cue, on your show. All right. Any questions on that so far? I'm moving quite fast, so slow me down.
Yeah, Matthew, block is cue list dependent. Yeah, blocking only affects that single cue list. It doesn't affect other cue lists you might have playing.
Yep. All right, so something else in the cue list, we're going to look at the difference here. There's some other things here that we can do too. So I'm going to, one other thing, when you have a cue list you've blocked, you can also unblock it. If I say unblock, it removes all that from the queue. So you don't have to delete the queue or start anything else again. There's another tool in here, and I'm going to go into, let's do this. Let's go to tracking. So right now, a great way of showing people, especially for people that don't understand tracking, because Vista is so visual, there's a handy little view in here that shows tracked events. So when that is turned on in timeline, I can see this sort of grayed out event in here. And this is showing that this stuff is tracking from the original cues. So any cue I'm clicking on, I can see that, hey, this stuff is still tracking through. It's handy for troubleshooting if you're wondering why a fixture is hanging. Is it tracking? And like I said, it's great for showing people that don't understand what tracking is of what it does there. Again, that's in timeline, show tracked events. So something else that's possible in Vista is you can actually have events in here twice. So for example, these fixtures, if I were to be in this queue, so they're tracked on, they're on right now, I wouldn't need to do this. But if I were to actually turn this, hit the intensity and adjust and put the intensity in these things again at full, now I have two events for full. So I'm basically doing a sort of a queue only editing type thing here. However, nothing else is happening after here. So it's queue only, but it's not. If you get into a situation where you're doing this a lot, this actually can start slowing down your show file or your queue list depending on how it's going. So there is a tool in here called remove redundant queue list events. And what this would do is it's going to look for things like this where it's already at full, it's being told to be at full again, and I don't need that. So I can remove it. And it's going to tell me I removed 18 events from that list. This is kind of like doing a block. So if I were to turn this into a block, this is the difference between this one. If I make this a block queue, I'm going to see the same thing here. So the events are at full, the events are at full here. However, if I go and I try to do that exact same tool again, it's not going to let me do that because it knows that this is a block queue and it knows that I want this to stay there. So the reason I bring this up is because it's easy to accidentally create or maybe even intentionally create your own sort of blocked queue that's not officially blocked, and then go in here and remove the events, and then you lose all that. So if you want to do this exact type thing where I have a physical hard events for everything again, then you want to make it a block queue to do that. All right, so I'm going to close this all up. All right, so next up with some more things in queue list editing. something I touched on yesterday with copy and pasting cues. We're going to expand on that a little bit today. So if you were here yesterday, great. If not, they're going to go through some of the same things a little bit here. Vista has a lot of tools for copy and pasting cues. So I'm going to create a new cue list. And in this case, I'm going to do this one. I'm going to turn these lights on. I like to pick on the Vipers a lot, put them in blue, put them in the front. And I'm going to call this walk-in. All right. My next cue is going to turn on the profiles. And this is going to be my stage cue. And then I'm going to turn off the profiles, and I'm going to take these and fly them out. And this is going to be called my video cue. So something we mentioned yesterday about copy and pasting cues, I can click and I can drag on these to copy and paste them. So in this case, if I were to click and hold my left click on this and drag it over and drop it, it creates a copy of the cue. Some of our other tools to do this are copy paste using Control-Shift-C. So again, if I copy a cue here, and then paste it, I can use Control-C, Control-V for normal paste, but we also have another couple paste options. So Control-Shift-V opens up the window called Paste Special. So what this will do is gives us three different options. One is the original, paste the entire look of the cue. Paste only events, so it untracks it. And alias original cue. This is the one that is quite handy and quite key on a lot of stuff. So if I say alias original cue, what I'm going to see is I'm going to see this little flag come up here on these two cues. So these two cues to Vista are one and the same. Any change I make in either one of these cues is going to be adjusted in the other cue. So for example, use alias cues for something like a stage look. So I've spent my time, I've set up my stage look with my fixtures. Basically, I'm looking for these profiles and what they're doing. And I decided, you know, I really like this. But then the video guys come in and they say, well, that's a little too bright. And if I've gone and created my entire show, all my cues, using that stage look cue over and over again, if I did it as a normal copy and paste, I'd have to go through every cue and readjust it. If I do it as a alias cue, I can make my adjustment in any one of these alias cues, and it's going to filter through all the rest of them. So for example, they come in, and I'm somewhere in the show, somewhere in the cue list, and they say, well, let's back that down. Let's take it 70% instead. I'm going to go back to the timeline. And now I can see any change I've made in this cue has also filtered back to this previous cue. I'll change it to 80%. So we can dial this thing in, and these cues are one and the same. Now, in order to create an alias cue, you have to copy and you have to paste it and paste as an alias. You can't take two existing cues and decide to make them alias. It doesn't work that way. You can break the alias though if you decide. So in the edit menu, there's another function called remove cue alias. And when I do this, it's going to break this alias, and now this cue becomes its own standalone cue. That flag goes away, and everybody's happy. Now, if I didn't want to do that, I can't go back and change this back to be an alias. In this case, I could just because I have Control-Z to undo that. If I wanted to make more alias, actually, let's do this. I want to do this. Sorry. Shift-C. I can make multiple cues alias altogether. So as I adjust this one, it's still adjusting the rest. And then again, I can break any one of these aliases without breaking the other one. So if I were to break the center one on Q4, these two still stay aliased. I can also alias multiple cues at the same time. So if I decided to take all three of these, Control-Shift-C, Control-Shift-V, I can alias all three of those cues at the same time, and these are all aliased right back to these. So in a corporate show, you might only have 3 cues in the entire show, and you just keep cycling through them all the entire time. You could alias all 3 of those together, and then any change you make, say in video, they say, you know, your shade of blue isn't quite right, so we're going to adjust that. And now that continues to be in all the rest of them. that are aliased. All right, I'm going to delete a couple of these now. So earlier today, we had a question about what happens if you delete the first Q. There are multiple delete options if I do that. So if I were to go in here and click on this Q and say delete the Q, I'm going to get this pop-up here, and it's going to ask me, how do I want to delete it? Do I want us to delete it? If I delete it just as it is, everything's going to go away. And now I'm stuck with a queue that really has no other information in it because the Vipers are all turned off. Undo that. If I delete the queue and say delete queue only, what's going to happen is it's going to move that information into the following queue. So I still get the same look that I was looking for, except for some of those things that I might have already removed or meant to remove. All right. I'm going to delete all these. Actually, let's do this. All right. Any questions on this right now? I'm just looking at
myself. I say no, other than you can alias across queue lists. It's the same queue. Sorry, same queue list.
Yeah, you can only alias inside the same list. It's not, doesn't go across other lists. You could do some other things to do something similar to that if you wanted to do extracts and whatnot, or also commands. But for alias, it's all in the same queue list.
I wouldn't also recommend having a master song list. I just have each song as a separate list. That's a much better way of working, and use presets to kind of block out your actual templates. It's a much better way of working.
Yep. All right. Close that out for now. All right. So yeah, so those are some of the things you can do with editing queues and with blocking and what tracking is. I seem to have gone through that quite fast. What am I missing, Jack?
I'm just trying to think. You've gone double speed.
I have gone
literally double speed.
I have gone way fast through all that. So yes, I can go back through and show some other things again. I'm gonna look through some of these questions. Yes, blocking is queue list dependent. Normal blocking is queue list dependent. Obviously, super blocking will affect other queue lists, but blocking itself is only going to affect the single queue list that you're in. And back to yeah, so you've already answered some of these questions, Jack. Yes, you can take out the aliases on those queues later on. Block at the end of a list. Blocking at the end of the list might not really help you much. Blocking at the beginning of the list might be handy, actually, because blocking is more designed to start fresh in the queue list. So if I have this fixture, have these fixtures here at that, and this is my, let's say this is my song, and then I have a blackout, and in my blackout, and my next one, I'm going to come up with a singer. I'll come up here and do Hello?
Hey, Ben, you're back.
I'm back. I don't know
We
what
lost
happened
you.
there. Suddenly, so it flipped over to you for a moment there. I think you're still sharing your screen.
My screen.
Hold on here. Let me kick on mine.
Let's just take
Wow.
a look.
Okay. I should be up and running again.
Let me just see. I'm just trying to pull up the chat there. We had some questions come in.
Is everyone still there? If you can ping the chat real quick to see what happens. Was it just me that went away, or did everybody
I
go away?
think it was you.
Wow, that was very strange.
I think it was you. Just to
Okay.
pick up on Steve's question, it's better to have individual songs in their own queue list. Typically, that's only because they're easier to manage. You know, if you're programming song 2 in a big long list, you don't want that to start messing up song 3. 100 songs in one long list. I don't think we typically recommend that. I don't know your thoughts on that, Ben.
It comes down to how you're programming. I mean, if you're doing a theater show, then you might want to have one long list of everything.
Oh
You
yeah,
know,
theatre,
even
absolutely. But in terms
even
of
a theater
musical
musical,
tracks, yeah,
yeah.
right. We're just talking
Uh,
about sort of rock and roll, where each list is each week you're pulling in
yes.
just the songs that you need into perhaps a different show file, and that's good for housekeeping for that.
And even with having even single songs in queue lists, if you're doing live shows or whatnot, you might have these multiple different queue lists running, which is where the Superblock comes in handy. Because if I go back into that example of uh, of these two lists, I might have a key light list that stays on all the time, and we don't adjust at all through the run of the show. But I do have cues, or I do have a couple cues I want to make sure that, this is the one that I'm running the whole time, and I'll make sure that those key lights go off or things like that. So I also like super blocking for maybe uh, basically solos or flash hits or things like that.
Just to answer Steve's last question there about live events when you're recording cues out of order frequently and busking, we are going to be doing a dedicated video on things like theatre programming and then working live and busking. So you could perhaps use super blocking sometimes, but personally, for that exact thing, I would be using two other features. One is a snapshot, and the second is an insert command in the first preset of each new song to release everything else as well. We will be detailing that exactly in a future webinar.
And if you wanted to use a queue list in a way where you can bounce through queues, then it also might help to use the Cueonly editing, because that's going to untrack everything for you automatically, uh, rather than blocking every queue. But that's the thing. There's a couple different tools you can use in Vista depending on what you're trying to go for. So I wouldn't say there's a right way or a wrong way to do it. It's whatever works best for your workflow. All right, Jim, I'm trying to see your question here. Home selected. Uh, yeah, home selected would work at the beginning of a queue list. It basically takes all the parameters back to their default values. It is hard putting the value in the queue list. So unlike something where I add a release event to something, there we go, Jack. That's something we did in yours. I didn't do. So let's do this. Let me open up the other list. All right. So pull that over there. All right, so let's do this. In this list, I'm going to kick the fixtures out. I'm only going to add that to it. All right, we'll see how well this all works out for me. Some of these situations are hard to do in theory. They work much better when you actually do them in practice, when you have a reason to do it. Oops, got to pull that off there first. All right, so my list 4. All right. So I'm going to release everybody here real quick, just so I can get to where I want to be. I want this list on and this list on. Okay. All right, so right now my position is being driven by this queue. And when I click the other queue, it's going to go through those positions as well. So if I wanted to go back to where this position was, I could change the event to be a release event on the position on those fixtures. Let's see if this should work properly. If I take that position event in this queue and convert it to a release event, oops, let's get all these. Too many things on my screen, can't see everything. What that's done is instead of it being a hard value in here, it's now releasing control of that back to where it was in this queue. So in that case, I can have this going up here, or if I go back even farther, when I'm telling it. So this queue list is having these fixtures up in the air. But I'm running through the show and I have that ready to go, and I run through this show, and so this is running in the background right now. That position is in the background because I'm latest takes precedence. And as I'm running through that, they're going to stay up there. And now they hit this queue and it's releasing those position events, and it's throwing those fixtures to the position that's in here. So a release event is basically taking this out of the queue list without adding a hard event to it. A home event would do the exact same thing. It would take those fixtures to their home position. Putting a home event in the first queue is handy. You could have that to start out. I don't know if it would work on everything all the time, but it is a way of doing something where you're, you're starting at point each time.
Can you just quickly demonstrate redundant events again? Just to program some.
Yeah. Yeah, let's do this. Let's make some bad redundant events. So right now I'm going to go to Q2. I'm going to keep this real simple. In Q2, I'm going to turn the intensities on again. And actually I have Cueonly on, so that's going to screw that all up. Let's go back and do this again. All right, so I turn the intensities back on in Q2. So right now I've got the same events happening in both these queues. Sometimes programmers that don't understand tracking, especially new people in lighting, might do this. They might go through and say, oh, well, there's no event on those queues, so I don't really know if the lights are staying on, especially if you're not looking at the stage. So right now I've got all these events are the same things, and it's redundant information. We don't need it in there. So under tools, we can go to remove queue list, redundant queue list events, and it's going to pull out 20 events. So that was the 10 events of each of these in there. And now it goes away. We don't need that. Now, if you had intentionally wanted that intensity to come on in one of these queues and you wanted it to stay there because you're going to change something here, let's say if I go into this queue list or this queue and I change it to 50%, let's say I wanted it to actually go back to 100, I might want to make that a block queue rather than do that manually. So it's possible to do this. Right now, if I did remove redundant events, it wouldn't do it. It wouldn't take it away because it is right. But if I was to do this in preparation of doing something else later on down the line, and I forgot I did that, and I went back through here and I redid that, it would pull those out. And then if I went back to this queue and changed them to 50%, they're going to stay at 50% until they go somewhere else. All right. Catching up on some questions here.
One we missed is Kyla's question, but I wasn't sure what you demonstrated in the your stage look. You might want to just check that out.
Alias function across multiple queues, like 3 queues in each. So I think I follow your question here. Let's do that again. Oops. I'm just going to do this as a brand new cue list because I have no idea what I did in these other cue lists. Okay, so those 3 cues. All right, so these 3 cues, when I run through them, if I were to alias these to later on down the line, they would all pretty much stay the same way. Now, if there was something in particular, like let's say in video here, in video, I actually want these to come off because I don't want those on. Let me just bounce through these and make sure they're exactly what I want. So I have my walk-in look, then I have my stage look, I have my video look. Those lights go off, they come up. So if I were to play this back to the beginning, they should come down, back to my walk-in. Yeah, that looks good. So aliasing these 3 cues. Now when I play through this, they should still do exactly what I want them to do, just repeat themselves. I'm gonna go back to walk-in. All right, so right now, because I don't have an actual event in the walk-in here, walk-in was set as straight down, so I don't have a position event in here. So I need to add a position event to that walk-in queue. So right now, if I wanted to add that position event to the walk-in queue, it'll also add it to the next walk-in queue, or the next walk-in queue. So let's say this is going to be, the walk-in is going to be everything to the front. Now, if I look at this one, everything is back and it's in the front again. Turn off queue view. Zoom this all the way out. They come up, my video, they come back down to walk in, and they come up and back out. And I could continue to do that over and over again. So just color vipers is like, now if I were to, because the color of the vipers in the first queue is driven from here and it's being tracked all the way through to the next queue, if I do adjust the color of the vipers to say green, it will continue to track and it will be changed to green again in that next queue. So actually, technically this other queue, this is redundant information here because this is tracked through and this is never changed. So yeah, so it would stay there until I tell it to do something else. So let's say in the walk-in queue, I put them in green, and the video queue, keep it in link. Video queue, I want them to go to blue. So now I'd have multiple things going on. They come up in green, they move, fade to blue as they go out, they come back into green. So does that answer your question, Kayla? I'm hoping that's what you're asking. Let's see. Any questions up here that we might have missed earlier?
I think you have them all, to be honest. Yeah, this video is going to be on our YouTube channel. All of the previous webinars, there's 7 of them there already on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't already subscribed to that, check that out, and you'll be notified every time we upload a video. So there's also my webinar from earlier on of the exact same content as Ben. So there'll be lots of examples of the content we're discussing today.
All right, so yeah, a bunch of questions coming in here. Let's go back up. Jim, purpose of a release event is to, for lack of a better term, release the control of the fixture from this queue list. So if I didn't want this queue list to control the color anymore, let's say instead of having color in these queues, I had another queue list that was driving color. Because Vista's latest takes precedence, if I continue to play through these queues, this color will continue to be output to the lights because it's the last thing done. But if I had a baseline queue list running that was just the color, I could release this from here and it would revert back to the other cue list. And that color from the other cue list would be driving it instead of this one. So let's do that. Let's create another one real quick. And we're going to do this. I'm going to put these lights in red. All right. So now, so they're in red because that was the last thing I did. If I come back through here and play this in the blue, play this in the green, it's going to continue to do exactly what I'm doing in this cue list. Even though this is still running and they're still in red back here, this won't do anything until I actually play the cue again, because this is the last action that I've done. So if I wanted this to always be there and never, and just happen at different times, I could take these events here, instead of making it green, I could change it to a release event. And it's going to release it in this one too, because they're aliased. But now when I play into this cue, they go to blue, but then when I play the release, it's going to go back to the color that's being driven from this cue list. And in the next cue, if I put them back to another color, let's say green, now I take control of them again. Yeah, Steve, Moving Black, we're going to do next week, I think. Yeah, because it's got its own thing, presets and Moving Black. Yep.
Just to jump in on the schedule there, Alec. So we have planned out the next 3 or 4 weeks of content, so we know what we're going to be doing, and we're going to be announcing it probably every Friday. So every Friday we'll tell you the next 2 webinars, just so you don't all forget what the whole month's schedule is. So every Friday we'll post it on social media. You'll also be able to go to our training section of our website. But I can tell you that next Wednesday is going to be on Moving Black and presets in much more detail than we touched on in the intro. And let me just double check what the Thursday content.
Let's see.
Yeah, so the Thursday content is structured cue lists and working with features that work well for that. So like theatrical programming, corporate AV, where you're using long lists and different views to be able to help manage that.
Block and Moving Black are separate items. Or Mark relates to Moving Black. It doesn't relate to Block at all. So that's a separate thing, and that's what we'll cover next week. I saw something up here earlier. From Steven. Building on Kayla's question, if you added a block, would it prevent the green from tracking through? Yes, yeah, it would still, it would, the green, well, what it would do is it creates the hard event for that green color. So if I change the green before that, it would always go back to that look that I had. So basically, if a block cue is going to always give you that same look that you originally created when you made the cue. So anything that's changed beforehand would not be changed in that block cue, so to speak. So, and basically Moving Black, or not Moving Black, Block and Cueonly, the end result is almost the same thing. The difference is that when it's a block cue, it's actually a notation on the cue itself rather than just Cueonly. Cueonly just continues to put the same, the next event, or return it to the original event in the next cue. What's funny is there's a lot of things that actually do all the same thing. They just do it a little differently depending on what you're trying to do.
And with blocking as well, you can block Q10, but add something in Q2 that will track through Q2 through 9, and then it will be released at that Q10 point. So that's the main difference with the block.
Let's turn them on again. We'll do the same example here again. Yeah, so when I block something, It's not that it stops tracking through it. It adds hard values for all those events. So it's going to be, no matter what I do in previous queues, I'm going to get that same look that I originally programmed here all the time. So if I change those to cyan, it's not going to change what happens in here. So it's basically, it's saying that, hey, this is the look I want to see. I made this look. I want this look to remain this way all the time, no matter what I do in previous queues ahead of it.
But likewise, if you add some fixtures to queue number 1, like some beams or something like that.
Yep. If I add anything into queue number 1, it's going to take them away from the other, from that queue. So if I bring these in, when I get to that last queue, it takes those beams away because that is not, they were not in look when I originally made this a block. And if I look at it in the timeline, I see that those are all been released in that queue. So yes, it's definitely something, it's a way of saying this block, this queue this is the look I want to see. And that's why Superblock is helpful too, because Superblock then makes sure that if you have other queue lists running, you're not getting in there and making this look different from what you originally programmed. I added that queue in there for some reason. I meant to add it at the end of this, because then in the end, I'm going to take those fixtures and kick them into, ooh, I haven't used yellow yet. And where it's helpful is now that it creates a new fresh starting point for everything going off of there. So from here, this stuff will continue to track forward. But if I change anything ahead of it, it won't track past that point. All right. If you have Superblock enabled in 2 different queues, LTP, yeah, I mean, it's going to be, wow. I mean, it's going to go by whichever queue was fired last. I don't know what would happen if you try to fire 2 queues that were Superblocked at the same time. That could be interesting. It might need to try that just to see what happens. yeah, make it real quick. Yeah, let's see. I've already been kicked out of this meeting once by, the problem is I can't actually do it without a console attached. I would need, in order to fire both these at the same time, well, I could go into commands, but we're not going to get into that right now. I'd have to hit both those playbacks at the exact same time to see what would happen. It's something I'll have to play with to see what would happen with all that.
I don't think you get it exact anyway. There'll be like a millisecond out or half a millisecond out, and that'll be your answer.
The only thing, I can't think of a practical situation where you'd actually do that. I mean, if you had to do something like that, then maybe there's better ways of doing it other than super blocking 2 queue lists at the same time. And something that was brought up a number of times this morning was with queue list priorities, and that we have a whole webinar dedicated to priorities on these things. So that's another thing where you could get in there and change the priority of different queue lists. So certain ones would have more power than other ones, so to speak. All right, so we still have some time left. If anyone has any other questions, we can do that, or it's up to. So no, you can't, Kayla, you can't alias queues between different queue lists. An alias is only in a single queue list. You can copy and paste queues between queue lists, but you can't do the alias. It doesn't do the alias part. It will break that. Because really what's happening is when I alias a queue, it's doing, Vista sees it as the exact same queue. So it's just referring to the same queue in that list. If I copy and paste between queue lists, it creates a new instance of that queue in the new queue list. So it's not something where there's any link between those two. I do believe that has been brought up a number of times, though. Just don't think it's possible to do. Clint, I'm not sure what your alias. Oh yeah, no. If you're copy and pasting between queue lists, you wouldn't be aliasing because it would be a new instance. I could see where it would be helpful if you wanted to have the same queue in multiple places. However, we've got other things that can do that, like extracts and presets, or even commands. Commands would allow you to do that type of thing, where you can, if you've got a certain queue in a list that you want to see used other places, just like this, my single queue here. If it just had the intensity in it, I could create a command and put it in other queue lists that fire that queue. So that would probably be a better way if you had something specific, and even a full queue list. I could trigger a command from a full queue list. Release everybody right now. Yeah, commands we're going to do later. Jack, when did we have commands scheduled to do?
We have already touched on commands in one of the videos on YouTube already. It'll say commands in the title, so you can go ahead and watch that. But we will probably tie it together again with when we do the webinar on working in sort of a live event, so working with sort of musical tracks, because we'll be using snapshots and inserted commands to get the console to feed you exactly what you need to when the band change set list without telling you and stuff like that.
Yeah, what we did with commands earlier was more of the basics of what they can do. Commands are another one of those things where you almost have to have a specific situation that you need a command to be used in. You can do a lot of fun things in there. Yeah, but they'll apply to both of the future webinars as well.
And in webinar 3 and 4, if you go on the YouTube channel, they're already in there, either Ben hosting it or me hosting it, whichever accent you prefer.
Nice, yes. Yes, so yes, a practical use of block is exactly to do that. It won't, I mean, you turn on a light, it's more about forgetting to turn it back off again, the light. If you have a block later on, it will prevent you from forgetting that light was left on. So if I have all these on, and I'm through all this stuff, I'm just gonna throw this all in here and go back.
So,
yeah.
So to jump in, imagine that this first block is 1 to 4, which could be a certain scene in the performance, and this second block is 5 to 8. That's how you can think of blocking. You're just blocking out your cue list into sections, so you can edit something in 1, 2, 3, and 4, knowing that it's not going to get past this block in queue number 5.
So yeah, so here's my first scene. Lights come on. I'm going to go to 6 here and turn these on. Call that blackout. So lights come on, and exactly, if I say I forgot to turn on a light, I turn on this light, and now I keep playing through it. If this cue here was not a blocking cue, that light would continue to stay on until I told it to go off. But because it's a blocking cue, I don't have to tell it to go off. It automatically is going to go off because it's designed to say that this is my blackout all the time. Yes, Alec, yeah. So if you create a song in a section, have block cue at the start of the next song and preserve the look. Yep, yep. Again, I really like blocks in blackouts, especially when you're doing a theater show and you have hundreds of cues in a single cue list. Knowing that every blackout is a block means you can bounce through things and decide at any point in time that, oh, I need that light on. And then when you get to the end of the scene, you don't have the director barking at you, why is that light hanging, or something like that. Yeah, that is my go-to usage for blocks. There's lots of other usage you can use it for, especially if there's a look, like I said before, if there's a look that you want to have all the time and make sure that that stays. But yeah, blackouts is it's my get out of jail free card on that one. All right. Any other questions for anybody? If you've got something, feel free to bring it up. Going back to what Jack said, yes, this is WYSIWYG is our demo. We're using the console demo of this. We are going to put this show file, both the WYSIWYG file and the Vista file, up on the website at some point. That way you could download both and play with it as well. Block prevents new values. It prevents those previous values from tracking through. If I'm in a blocked queue, here, I could add another value to it if I wanted to. And when I add that value, that's going to continue to track forward from there because it happened in the block queue. So blocking doesn't really affect anything after it if the item is put in that blocked queue. It's going to keep things from previous queues from tracking past that point. And yeah, it could be your home look. Yeah, I mean, Blackout's an easy one. It could be something where you have a blue look, a backstage blue look come on, and that's what that look is going to be every time. So yeah, I'm just playing now. All right. Well, we used up a lot of that time. Some good questions there, guys. Luckily everything stayed on topic, which is great. I said we do have other webinars coming up, so tune into those. So we're going to go spend more time going into different functions more in depth. The first two that we did 2 weeks ago, we kind of did a overall of everything, so we kind of rushed through a lot of stuff. I think the next ones, Jack, we're going to pretty much do the same thing. It's less content and more Q&A time, since we really kind of blew through.
Yeah, right. So next week will be presets and moving black. That's on Wednesday. On Thursday, we'll then talk about programming and more tips and tricks of programming in theatrical queue lists and big long structure queue lists. So corporate AV, similar to the type of examples we've been doing today. And then in the coming weeks, we'll have different examples. So typically on the Wednesday, we'll talk about features of something, and then on the Thursday, we'll give you tips and tricks about how to work in a live event with musical tracks or education and worship and that type of stuff.
Yeah, we have a lot of stuff to cover, and lots of things. If you have any questions or if you run into anything, feel free to shoot us an email at vistasupport@chroma-q.com. Yeah. So with that, if there aren't any questions, we'll wrap this up for today, and we'll see everybody next time.